Hi everyone, welcome to Tantra Tuesday. And this week, by request, I'm going to be discussing Tantra and Kink, why Tantra is inherently kinky, and what to do if your kinks are twisting you up. So my name is Heidi, and it's my job to get you the relationships that you crave, whether with your boss, your beloved, or with your very own kinky side. So I always like to start when I'm looking at Tantra and something else at the history and the scriptures. And I can tell you right off the bat that there isn't a sutra or a scripture that specifically discusses kink. And that's mostly because kink as a word didn't exist, 1,500 years ago. But what I can tell you is that it is actually inherently kinky, like right at the core. And what does kink really mean anyways? Kink in a sexual context or any context is kind of a desire that's unconventional or a fantasy or behavior, something that would be considered abnormal to the average person, right? So if you take that definition, just the straight dictionary definition of kink, and you look at what Tantra is, most paths of Tantra are created around this violating taboos. That's another way to think of kinky, right? Is violating, going against what's considered normal, what's considered conventional, being into the taboos. Okay, so in Tantra, there's two main paths. There's the left hand and the right hand. The left hand is the one that most of us are familiar with. And at its core, it looked at the taboos and it endeavored to break them. And fun fact, just doing Tantra in that time and place, if you were in a woman's body, would have been considered a taboo because women weren't allowed to have access to these esoteric high spiritual teachings. And further than that, Tantra sought to violate many taboos, things that were considered unheard of at the time, like eating fish. Or drinking wine or meat. There's also certain tantric rituals that involved very, very profane, I'm going to say that in air quotes, but at the time, profane considered substances like menstrual blood or semen. And so if you're not familiar with Tantra, you might be wondering, what kind of twisted spiritual path is this, right? Well, the whole point of all the left-handed practice was to prove the axiom of Tantra, which is everything is divine. And when a tantric says everything, we really mean everything. And what they were endeavoring to do was to take examples that seemed extreme in their culture to prove this point. There are some very transgressive paths of Tantra that did extreme rituals in cremation grounds and ceremonies, and they involved skulls and corpses in their rituals just to prove to themselves and the tradition and the general public that yes, even this is sacred. So there's a commonality right away between the world of kink and the world of Tantra in that both of them really embrace taboos. The things that the rest of the culture or the normative culture might consider a little out there, might consider a little bit untouchable, both Tantra and Kink embrace that. So if you're watching on Facebook, give me a comment so I can see you're here. It's the only way I can see you're here. On Instagram, hello to everyone who's here. So the big thing about Tantra, which is so beautiful, is it'll never ask us to get rid of a part of ourselves. Tantra simply asks us to shift or examine the way that we relate to the parts of ourselves. And so there's a few questions that I'd like you to ask yourself. If this is something you're exploring and you're wondering how these two relate, or maybe if kink is causing you trouble in your life, if you're not quite at peace with this part of yourself, I have 4 questions for you to ask yourself. Hey, Brendel, glad you're here. All right. How am I relating to my kink? Number one question, is it hurting anyone? So if it's something non-consensual that's causing harm, then that's a different talk for a different time. But if it's not, then I'm going to ask you to continue to question number two. And question number two, in how we relate to our kink, is, am I feeling guilt or shame around this? Now, there's a book that a psychologist wrote called Tell Me What You Want. And he explored what the DSM classified as all of these abnormal fetishes. And then he did statistical analysis with actual people where he conducted surveys, gathered up the data, and guess what he found? Kink is statistically normal. There's so many different desires that we have sexually and ways that we want to play them out. And if you amalgamate everyone's desires and preferences and then look at the number, it's more than the people who don't have a kink. So it's funny because kink is not kinky anymore. Kink has become normal and probably always was. But there's this wow. They pathologize. I'm more comfortable with that form of the word. In the medical health industry and psychiatry, psychology, they pathologize a lot of things that most people are into. So I just want to leave that as sort of a thing to keep in the back of your mind. You know, just in case you're thinking that you're weird and alone and freaky, chances are that you're statistically normal. The other thing about guilt and shame is that the way that we relate to our fantasies, the way that we relate to our kinks and our preferences determines how much we can heal from them. So if it's something that you're not comfortable with, the amount of guilt or shame that you have around it is going to keep you from working with it. Because remember, Tantra is not trying to make us get rid of anything. It's just shifting the way that we relate to it. Shifting from, I'm relating to this in an unhealthy way, to how can I relate to this in a healthy way? So the second thing is really about how am I relating through my guilt and shame? Okay, and I'm going to share with you how to work with this at the end of this talk. But for now, just track yourself along with these questions. And the third one is it limiting me in any way? Now, if there's something that you are reliant on, you are dependent on, you have a codependency with a certain body part or a certain sexual act in order to access your sexual energy, that's a limiting place to be, right? There's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but you're not able to experience the full spectrum of your sexuality. That's what Tantra teaches us, both in our sexuality and in our wider life, is how can we experience the broad spectrum of who we are? And again, this is because we are considered universes in this tradition. We are literally a tiny replica of existence. We are God in all of God's colors and flavors and textures. And so on this path, our mission, our homework, if you will, is to continually unfold more and more of those qualities, to learn to channelize more and more energies in a positive way. And it's not limited to the energies that are traditionally considered the good or the acceptable or the normal. No, 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 no. The whole point is to prove to ourselves as tantrics that everything is sacred. So you may find that if there's something that isn't hurting anyone and you've accepted it about yourself, realize that you might not be alone, but that it's still limiting you in some way, then there might be a portal for you to walk through to release some of the inner prisons around accessing your own sexuality and your own passion. The fourth question, and this is really important, the fourth question I want you to ask yourself is, what is the wisdom or the gift And this is often a surprise, because if there's something that we were told is abnormal or wrong, it's sometimes not natural to ask, oh, what is the wisdom or the gift? But every single dynamic that we face in our life, that we experience, is just the end of a ball of thread leading to our truest, most divine, most sovereign self. So you can start to look at everything as an opportunity for enlightenment. And that's really what this path is about. It's every single thing, without exception, is an opportunity to raise our consciousness. So what I've done for my clients in my King of Hearts program is we work with this in great detail. And what we find is when we examine the dominant sexual fantasy, your favorite sexual fantasy or your preferences, and we look at it from a very neutral lens, we can uncover the themes and the patterns and the energies in that and use that as a map to get to not only what is the opportunity for your growth, but what is the gift? And also, what are other ways that this particular need can be satisfied? What's so fascinating is how our sexuality relates to every part of our existence. And so through the blueprint that I work with, called the Divinity of Fantasy, we actually reverse engineer and trace back step by step what the dynamics are of your particular fantasy. And we look at all the sides of it. It's wisdom, it's gifts, how this is really showing you that there's something in you that's unique. There's a particular need in you that's unique. And we can find many, many ways to have that need fulfilled. So that's really unlimited in its scope. I work a lot with men around pornography and finding different ways to relate to that. And of course, sexual fantasy is something that's so not talked about publicly. So it's really important to consider the divinity of things, divinity of all things. And I just want to leave you with this axiom again, or this way of approaching life in the tantric tradition. And it's so, so important, because there's no part of you that's bad. Because if you're going to point to a part of you and say that part's bad, you got to point to God, or if that word is a trigger, then to source or the divine. I don't care what you call it. It's that essence that permeates and waves through all of existence, creating everything. And if you're going to point to a part of you and say that's wrong, that's bad, you're also pointing to the divine, to the sacred, and saying that's wrong, that's bad. So you can hopefully breathe a sigh of relief and know that all that matters is how you're relating to it. So watch this video again, go through the 4 questions, and if you want to work with me privately on this, then look up my King of Hearts program. It's on the Shamaya Tantra website at shamayatantra.com. And you can always keep current there and through the Facebook page at Shamaya Tantra. Okay, I want to say thank you to everyone who's here. If you've got any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat now. And if not, then I will see you next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time, on Instagram and Facebook. And head on over to YouTube if you want to see the library of past videos. There's 40 plus videos on there in all different topics. So head on over there, and if you'd like to subscribe, you'll get notification when new videos come out. Okay, awesome. Thank you, and you're welcome. We'll see you next time.